Recently here at NBC, we had the privilege of hosting Dr. Rodgers. Dr. Rodgers is a former senior flight surgeon for the Department of Defense and NASA. He was the chief of aerospace medicine at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, where he had astronauts among his patients. He has also been trained by a great variety of scientific personnel at locations ranging from medical school to Kennedy Space Center. Dr. Rodgers has taken his combined educational concepts and applied them both to the Holy Bible and the universe. He considers science to be the very expression of God's Word within our universe. He looks into the concepts of black holes as principles for our actions as revealed in the Bible itself. His approach to scientific evidence even reveals how the space-time continuum from the Big Bang was derived by God. We hope that you enjoy the next few minutes as you watch this video.
I'd like to start with Daniel chapter 12 because God actually talks about this. The great thing about God is that he knows everything beforehand and he's already got it covered. I'm going to start with the first verse. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall wake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, there stood other two, the one on this side of the bank of the river, and the other on that side of the bank of the river. And one said to the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and sware by him that liveth forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and an half. And when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end. Now then, if God told Daniel that all of these miraculous prophecies were going to come true, but that Daniel could not comprehend them because he's going to die and go with his fathers. It wasn't meant for him. It was meant for a special time. And he said that it was a time when we would go to and fro and knowledge would be increased. Now then, in these days, you could get in a chariot and drive a mile in just maybe 5 minutes if they're running. You know, if you were going to go from Jerusalem to Babylon, you better plan for a longer trip. Right now, we're circling the Earth in the International Space Station every 90 minutes. The astronauts will see 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets in every 24-hour period. They're traveling at over 17,000 miles an hour. That's 5 miles per second. So how long would it take them to get from here to Tulsa? About 16 seconds. The only problem is when you get there, it's hard to find a place to park that thing. Now, we have another prophecy that was made in Peter, 2 Peter chapter 3. And in this, he's talking again about the last days and what are going to be the things that will be happening. So starting with the second verse of chapter 3, that ye may be mindful of the words which were spoken before by the holy prophets, and of the commandments of us, the apostles of the Lord and Savior. Knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. For this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water. Now then, in the last days would come scoffers, walking after their own lusts. What does that mean? It means that they have their own agenda, and God's not part of it. So they are choosing not to know. Ignorance is a lack of information. But to be willingly ignorant means they are choosing not to know. They can see all of the facts. We can get facts from the Voyager spacecraft as it's exiting our solar system. But there's a big difference between facts and wisdom. They have lots of facts, but when they decide that they're going to trust their own wisdom instead of God, they're making a big mistake. So this says that in the last days they would be willingly ignorant of the truth. So when the scientists at the Kobe were looking at that data and they saw that it was an homogeneous presentation, the guy that stood up there and said, now we're going to find out what really happened. What he was saying is, I don't believe in God. I don't want to believe in God. There is nothing that spacecraft could bring back that I would admit would be the hand of God. And I'm going to deny every bit of it. That's what he was saying. He was being willingly ignorant. And so when he went out and had a press conference, he was talking about all of the great science that they were doing. And of course, he managed to slip in there some things about how we don't have to believe in religion or any of those ancient mythology things. But I'd seen the data, and this guy saw the data, and everybody in there saw the data. It showed that God created the cosmic microwave background. It's so strange that I heard one scientist talking about it, and he said it's like when we go into space, we suddenly find out that there's some ovens throughout the universe. And so that's pretty unusual. We find ovens. They're made by different manufacturers, and you don't know if they're turned on, whether anybody's using it or anything else. So if everything is random, just a random effect, as the scientists tell us, all of these ovens should be doing individual things. But that's not what we found. When you look at this oven right here, it's set to 425 degrees, and inside is a specific yellow cake. So we say, wow, that's interesting. So we go to a nearby one, and we say, wow, isn't that strange? It must be a local effect here because the oven's on 425 and it's cooking the same kind of yellow cake that one is. So we go to a different galaxy. We find another stove. It's still at 425 degrees. And when you look inside, it's baking the same yellow cake. We go across to the opposite side of the universe. We find an oven. It's on to 425 degrees. And if you look inside the oven, it's the same yellow cake. Now then, you could say, well, it just happened to randomly occur. No, it didn't. Give me a break. There's no way that happens. The only way we can have an explanation for every oven throughout the entire universe to all be at the same temperature cooking the same thing is that there's a chef in the universe. If there's a chef, then that means he's doing the cooking. And our universe was cooked by God. I want to bring up something. They keep talking about the long length of time that we find when we're looking at the age of the universe. And they'll say it's 13.8 billion years. Now then, at another time, they said it was 14.6 and all these other things. But it looks like 13.8 is a pretty good number. Now, one of the reasons that they want a very long time is that if you have no God, everything has to fit together by itself. Now then, that gets kind of crazy. They will use examples. This one I've heard many, many times. If you had enough gorillas sitting and typing throughout the entire universe, eventually one of them would type War and Peace without corrections. Now then, I don't know if they know how to do the paragraph headings, and they certainly couldn't do it on a computer because if you're wanting to put graphics in, it's not random. But they're trying to say that's random. But that's even a bad example. They don't know how to set the pages. It would not happen. But it gets even worse. When we look at what has happened throughout the scientific findings that we're making, there are always new, specific times where things change in an inexplicable manner. Now, that's curious. There's also things that once we learn it, we say, it doesn't seem to fit. Now then, they're wanting us to believe that all of these things happen randomly. Now then, let's take a big box, put every single piece of a 747 aircraft in it, and start shaking it for 13.8 billion years. Let's put 100,000 of them and start shaking them all. Let's put 10 million. At the end of 13.8 billion years, we're going to have 10 million boxes with a whole bunch of dented 747 parts that have not assembled themselves. The only way that aircraft gets assembled is if people who know and are trained and are careful with what they're doing use their intelligence and training to put that aircraft together. It cannot happen randomly. Now, keep in mind about the 747 because we're going to come back to it again later. I want to tell a story about one of the things that happened that made a big impression on me at the time. We were getting ready for a shuttle launch, and so I was out on my aircraft, Jolly 1. It was an H-3 helicopter. And so we were preparing for the launch, but they went into an unexpected hold because the launch vehicle was having some problems, and it didn't sound good. So I thought, I'm not going to sit out here in the heat. I'm going to go inside the operations building at the shuttle landing facility. So I went inside. Most of it was filled up, and there were only a few seats available. One of the seats that was open was right next to this guy in a suit. Now, at the operations building of the shuttle landing facility, at the time of a launch, there's not a lot of people in suits. But I went and sat down, and I saw that there was another guy across the aisle directly in front of him, and he had on a suit too. As I listened for a moment, they were arguing, and it was about science. But the topic of the scientific discussion was what floored me. This guy was arguing with that guy about the science proving God is real. This guy was arguing back that God was not real. And they were talking about some really high-level scientific stuff. There were times, I jumped into this conversation because I'm not going to let this go by. There would be times that they would be arguing about stuff that I'd never heard of, so they'd have to stop and teach me what it was so that I would understand what they were arguing for. So this went on for quite a while, and then they ended up scrubbing the launch. So everybody's going home. We can't leave because we had to stay there for an hour afterwards while they're egressing the astronauts from the launch pad. But these guys just got up, went out to an aircraft, and they were flying back to Houston. Now, I'd never seen this guy before. But the whole time he was talking, he really seemed to know his stuff. This guy was sharp. But everyone kept coming up and patting him on the back and saying, well, you gave it a good shot. better luck next time. You almost made it. You got to be proud of what you did, and all of these kinds of things the whole time. So as he got up to leave, I said, why is everybody giving condolences to this guy? This guy is sharp. I mean, he is brilliant. And they said, well, don't you know who he is? And I said, no. So they told me his name, which still meant nothing to me because I'd never heard it before. Then they said, he was a finalist for the Nobel Prize in Physics, but lost. I thought, oh, that's why he seems like he knows his stuff pretty good. But now then, the thing that really stuck with me from this is that as he got up to leave, he shook my hand and said, Major Rodgers, I sure hope we had an enjoyable time with you and that you had an enjoyable time with us, and we gave you some things to think about. He said, he looked me in the eye and said, now, of course, I cannot tell you that I'm going to go out and talk about this because I can't talk about it publicly. It would hurt my professional reputation. And so he shook my hand and left. There are lots of people like this man who believe in God. But in the science field right now, Christians cannot stand up and say, I believe in God, or they're going to be blackballed. So the people who are talking to us are people like the late Carl Sagan. Now, Carl Sagan was a nice guy. He could say billions and billions of things. But he was just a two-bit engineer with the Voyager program until they needed to go up against the manned spaceflight program for funding. The Voyager had to launch in 1977 because of the alignment of the planets, and it wouldn't happen again for more than 100 years. So they had to launch in 1977. So to get the funding, they needed somebody to stand up and talk about how great Voyager was, and they picked Carl Sagan, and he got famous. But every time he would talk, he would say that he didn't believe in God, and he would try to spin the science to make it look that way. And if you didn't know the science, he could make it sound pretty convincing. But that's the problem. He was convincing people with information that was being presented in a false and misleading manner. There are too many things in science that point to God for us to not believe that's true. I want to tell you first, let's go to 2 Kings chapter 6. I'm going to tell you, this is something that I put in my book, but this is something that really amazed me at the time because I immediately realized what it meant. Read starting with verse 10. And the king of Israel sent to the place which the man of God had told him and warned him of, and saved himself there. Therefore the heart of the king of Syria was sore troubled for this thing, and he called his servants and said to them, will ye show me which of us is for the king of Israel? And one of the servants said, none, my lord, O king, but Elisha, the prophet that is in Israel, telleth the king of Israel the words that thou speakest in thy bedchamber. And he said, go and spy where he is, that I may send and fetch him. And it was told him, saying, behold, he is in Dothan. Therefore sent he thither horses and chariots and a great host. And they came by night and compassed the city about. And when the servant of the man of God was risen early and gone forth, behold, an host compassed the city, both with horses and chariots. And his master said unto him, and his servant said unto him, alas, my master, how shall we do? And he, meaning Elisha, said, fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. Now then, we can understand that, God can do miracles. But so many of the things in this Bible were put there, and I believe that they were hidden until the time of science came along in our generation, because there's never been a generation like what's happened in the past 100 years. 100 years ago, there were still people driving into town in horses and buggies. Not a lot of horse and buggies, except maybe in Amish country. But we've got cars that drive on freeways. We've got airplanes that we can fly across the whole continent in a day. All of these things are happening because of science. And the discoveries that we are making are because of science. So here is what happened to me that caused me to immediately think of this story as soon as it happened. Back when I was in West Germany with the U.S. Army, we were part of the rapid deployment force of the Reagan days. I was out on this one mission, and I was with some pretty special people, and we'd moved into this area that was not real friendly to us if they'd known we were there. So we were trying not to draw too much attention. When we moved into this area, all of the guys that went in with me had set up a base camp, but they were all sitting there. So I said, shouldn't we be setting up a defensive perimeter? And the team chief looked at me and said, Doc, we got it covered. Here, look through my NVGs. So I picked up the night vision goggles. People are familiar with them now. Back then, not too many people did. I used to fly with night vision goggles, which was a real pain because they were real heavy. But I put on his night vision goggles, and I saw that we had sentries set up before we got there. So with my human eyes, I could not see my protectors. But with the night vision goggles, looking at a little bit of a different wavelength of life, they were there to be seen, and I did not have anything to worry about. But without the night vision goggles, I couldn't see them. I didn't know they were there. I felt like there was trouble, but I was being protected, whether I knew it or not. Now, God just put on night vision goggles, heavenly night vision goggles on this man, and he saw what was already there. They were standing there, being ready to defend him, even though there was no way in his human senses he could know that they were there. God said that there are angels around us all the time. This used to seem like a foreign concept. But as was mentioned earlier, there's this equation some people may have heard of. E equals mc squared. Anyone know who figured this out? Albert Einstein, very good. But now then, the thing is, I've heard people say that he's the one that invented E equals mc squared. No, he didn't. God invented it at the time he was preparing to make this universe. He already knew about this. He knew about us. He knew about each and every one of us in this room tonight before he made the universe. And Jesus was the lamb that was slain before the foundation of the earth. So God made E equals mc squared and then performed creation. So this is interesting because when we get into this, we get some really strange things that previously no one had thought about. E stands for energy. So there's no mass on this side. It's just pure energy. There's an equal sign. M stands for mass, and C is the speed of light squared. So that's 186,000 miles per second times 186,000 miles per second. So that's a big number. Now then, in 1945, we come to see this equation because when we made a plutonium bomb and a uranium bomb and dropped them on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, respectively, we took the mass, moved it across, extracted the energy, and came up with a big mushroom cloud and destroyed each individual city. But now, people who know math, people who know scientific equations, know that equal, when you're doing it in chemistry, will draw it like this because it goes both ways. Now then, at the beginning, we have E, we have M, and C squared. Now then, there's a problem here. At the moment of creation, God made light, but there had been no light before. So because he had not made light yet, this was a zero. How much mass was there? Zero. There was no mass to be found. There wasn't even a universe in which to put mass. And the energy over there was zero. Now then, scientists now have to say, okay, we know what happened after the Big Bang. We can we can guess as early as 10 to the minus 45 seconds. So that is 0.00045 times and then a 1. So that's a really short time. But they've got to explain how this originated. There are people who talk about a multiverse, saying that, an old universe turned into this one. Okay, do you have any evidence? None whatsoever. So, what is the logical explanation for this? They're going to have to believe something. Now then, when you don't have God, you've got no way to get to the E. But when you've got God, we've got it made. God put his infinite energy into the universe to load up this E so that there was huge amounts of energy. When it did, it exploded across this side. Now we had light. Now we had mass. The universe had come into existence. E equals mc squared is not just the equation of destruction at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is God's equation for how he has made the universe. When we look at this, we don't have to scratch our heads and say, we don't know how it happened. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So we have an explanation for this. I know people start getting nervous anytime you start writing equations like that up, so I'm going to leave that one alone. Now then, let's go to 2 Peter chapter 3. This is where we read before, but now I'm going to drop down a couple of verses, and I want to read verse 8, because Professor Paul, as I like to call him, knew about scientific theories. Okay, thank you. In verse 8 of chapter 3 of 2 Peter, he said, "But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as a day." Now then, if you've been reading up on Einstein and his theory of relativity, you realize that time is relative. There's no absolute time. If you're in a spacecraft flying really, really fast, and the typical story is there's two brothers, one of them gets in the spacecraft and flies, and the other one stays on Earth. As he approaches the speed of light, his clock will run very, very slow compared to the guy that stayed on Earth. So what may seem like 1 hour to him could have been 100 years on Earth. He turns around and comes back. His brother's grandchildren greet him, because that's what happens with relativity. Now then, if you're in that spacecraft, you could travel for 1 day, but the people on Earth would see 1,000 days. And it's still true. And this was not written by Einstein, this was written by Paul. God is not surprised by relativity. The reason is he created it. So Paul was talking about something that people could not really comprehend. You know, how could a day be as 1,000 years? Well, as soon as Albert Einstein came along and started explaining it, it worked. We can see this now. Now, Professor Paul also was talking about atomic theory in Hebrews 11. I seem to have lost that one. Okay, Hebrews 11. We're going to read verse 3. Through faith, we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things that do appear. Now then, today, we have a good concept of atoms. Our bodies are made of tissues. Our tissues are made of cells. Our cells are made of molecules. The molecules are made of atoms. The atoms are made of protons, neutrons, and electrons. The protons, neutrons, and electrons are made of quarks and leptons. And it goes on. But that's as far as I'm going for tonight, so don't worry. Paul did not have a scanning electron microscope. He did not have a flame analyzer for chemical spectrophotography. Yet he knew that the bodies that we have are made up of things that are invisible. Now then, how many scientists at that time were commenting on atomic theory? They had the concept of the potential for atoms, but they had no concept of electrons, what they would be like, protons, all this sort of stuff. And yet everything that is here is made of things that are invisible. And science proves this. We have cell phones, televisions. Do they work? Yes. Why? Because of God's science. We're figuring out what God did, figuring out how to use it. You know, electricity is wonderful. We can plug in a toaster, put in a piece of toast, pops up, we've got toast. We can have lights, we can have cameras, we can have all kinds of wonderful things. But electricity was always present on the earth. But when people saw lightning, you know, people in Scandinavia were saying, oh, it's the hammer of Thor. No, it's electricity. God made it, and you're going to be able to plug in a television one day and watch about this movie, Thor. Yeah, you'll be able to see it on the big screen and do all this kind of stuff. This stuff does not surprise God. Let's go to Acts chapter 8, and we're going to see another thing. Now then, some of us in here were around to see this as it was happening. The others are all going to be familiar with it when I give the explanation. Okay, starting with verse 5. Then Philip went down to the city of Samaria and preached Christ unto them. And the people with one accord gave heed unto those things which Philip spake, hearing and seeing the miracles which he did. For unclean spirits, crying with loud voices, came out of many that were possessed with them, and many taken with palsies, and that were lame and were healed. And there was great joy in the city. Let me skip down to verse 26. And the angel of the Lord spake unto Philip, saying, Arise, and go toward the south unto the way that goeth down to Jerusalem unto Gaza, which is in the desert. And he arose and went, and behold, a man of Ethiopian eunuch, with great authority under Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who had the charge of all her treasure, and had come to Jerusalem for to worship, was returning, and sitting in his chariot, read Isaiah the prophet. Then the Spirit said unto Philip, Go near and join thyself to this chariot. And Philip ran thither to him, and he heard him read the prophet Isaiah, and said, Understandest thou what thou readest? And he said, How can I, except some man should guide me? And he desired Philip that he would come and sit with him. The place of the scripture where he read was this: He was led as a sheep to the slaughter, like a lamb dumb before his shearer. So opened he not his mouth. In his humiliation his judgment was taken away, and who shall declare his generation? For his life is taken from the earth. And the eunuch answered Philip and said, I pray thee, whom speaketh the prophet this, of himself or some other man? Then Philip opened his mouth and began at the same scripture, and preached unto him Jesus. And as they were on their way, they came to a certain water, and the eunuch said, See, here is water. What doth hinder me to be baptized? And Philip said, If thou believest with all thine heart, thou mayest. And he answered and said, I believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. And he commanded the chariot to stand still, and they went down both into the water, both Philip and the eunuch, and he baptized him. And when they were come up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord caught away Philip, that the eunuch saw him no more. And he went his way rejoicing. But Philip was found at Azotus, passing through, and preached in all the cities till he came to Caesarea. So he moved 35 miles like that. Now then, this seems crazy for 1900 years. But in 1967, Star Trek comes on television. This guy steps into this transporter. They do this funny stuff, and he sort of disappears in this silvery mess, and then he reappears on the planet. But this is now based on quantum mechanics and theoretical science. We say, wow, that's great. Wouldn't it be fun when we can really do this? Hold it a second. God did this 2,000 years ago. These things are no surprise to God. He made it. I could go on, but there's one thing I want to get to real quick. Remember that 747 I mentioned? There's a thing called an Einstein-Rosen bridge, known as a wormhole. Theoretically, you can take one place in the universe, attach it to another one with enough energy, and you can zip from one place to another without going through the intervening space. This seems like something magical, but we now know that this is theoretically possible. There are movies made about it and all this kind of stuff. So let's pretend that we actually have the capability and technology to do this at this moment. So we take that 747 that we assembled, because all of the ones were dented that were in the boxes. So we get a 747, we take this back to ancient Egypt, and it lands and is sitting there in the sand. When the Egyptians get up the next morning, they look and they see this amazing aircraft, except they don't know it's an aircraft. They don't know what it is. And so we get out and we start telling them, this is an aircraft. It's really big, but if you get on this, we can fly you real high. We can fly 37,000 feet. And they say, how high is 37,000 feet? And they said, well, from here to Memphis, if you put that up, that's how high you would be. And they said, you're going to tell me that this thing can fly like a bird? This huge, great big thing, the biggest thing we've ever seen, and it's going to fly? Are you crazy? And you start telling them, well, see, back where we come from, we have televisions, and we have cell phones, and we have apps where we can play games on it. And they're looking at us like we are nuts. Now then, we tell them that the next day, this runway is going to appear coming through the wormhole, and the plane has plenty of fuel, so we're going to take off. And we're going to go back through the wormhole, and you can go back and see the 21st century and see all of these marvelous things. Most of the people are going to say, that's nuts. You're crazy. You people don't even know what's going on. But there will be a few people who actually believe us. Now, the rest of the people will ridicule those people for believing they can get on this huge, great, big, mighty thing and fly to a place that has things called television and chocolate ice cream and Rocky Road. They don't even know what Rocky Road is. So the next morning, here comes the runway. And we say, okay, this is it. Climb up into the aircraft. We're going to go back to the 21st century. You're going to see things. You don't even know what football is. Wait until you see football. It's great. Some of the people will be ridiculed, but they will climb on that airplane. And when it takes off, it flies up, goes through the wormhole, brings them back to the 21st century, and they get to see all of this. But what happened to the people who did not believe the truth we were telling them? Because it was inconceivable in their minds that this huge 747 could actually fly. When we took off, they were left behind. Now then, does that ring any bells? Absolutely. So God is showing us these things because they're real. And he's using the science to open up the Bible to all of these amazing truths that he's hidden in here. It's 8 o'clock, so I'll end for now, but I hope you've enjoyed it.